What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 12. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 12. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So the studs that I like, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Now, Justin Herbert has a good matchup here this week, but Mike Williams is out. But I do think he could still be a good play. He's only $7,000 DraftKings salary, so he could definitely score 20 plus fantasy points in this one. It's a fantastic matchup. And then coming down in salary a little bit, I like Joe Burrow, who's got a good matchup, and he had a fantastic week last week. Scored 32 fantasy points. He's still under 7K at 6,700 DraftKings salary. Now he is 1,900 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. But I am looking to save salary here at the quarterback position here in Week 12. So the guys that I'm looking at, first guy that's on my radar is Geno Smith from the Seattle Seahawks playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Geno Smith has averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game on the season. He's getting an average of 4.5 rush attempts per game. Gonna be about 14% owned, projected at 19.3 fantasy points here in Week 12. He's 6,000 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Seahawks favored by 3.5. Now, Geno Smith has scored 20, 22, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He had 4, 6, and 5 rush attempts in those games, so I like the rushing upside. I like the matchup. He's got fantastic wide receivers, so I like Geno Smith here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, coming down in salary even more, I like Derek Carr from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have the 10th worst defense overall. They give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, Derek Carr has averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.5 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 5% owned, projected at 18 fantasy points here in Week 12. He's 5,700 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel, and he scored 23, 18, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Derek Carr here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Now I also like Jimmy Garoppolo from the San Francisco 49ers playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle of the pack defense overall. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jimmy Garoppolo has averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 2.1 rush attempts per game. Also going to be about 5% owned, projected at 17.3 fantasy points here in Week 12. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, and he's 1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43 points scored in this game, with the 49ers favored by 9.5. Jimmy Garoppolo's been heating up here, scored 25, 16, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 1, 5, and 1 rush attempt in those games. I think the addition of Christian McCaffrey is going to help Jimmy Garoppolo quite a bit. We've already seen an improvement, and he's got great wide receivers, tight end. lots of people that catch the ball. We know Christian McCaffrey can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. So I think that sets up Jimmy Garoppolo to have a pretty good season moving forward. And his salary is still super low. Ownership is low. So I would get on the Jimmy Garoppolo train before he starts putting up 20 plus fantasy points on a consistent basis. Ownership and his salary will then go up, making him not as an attractive play. But I think right now is a buy low opportunity on Jimmy Garoppolo here versus the New Orleans Saints. Okay guys, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Paul Beeman. Congratulations, Paul Beeman. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So the studs that I like, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry. Josh Jacobs is in a good spot, but unfortunately he's questionable. He was limited on practice on Friday, so that adds a little bit of risk to that pick. Now, if he is good to go, I think he'd be fine to play. But just to err on the side of caution, I might want to go with a guy like Derrick Henry. But moving down in salary here, I like Kenneth Walker from the Seattle Seahawks playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Kenneth Walker has averaged 15 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13.4 rush attempts per game, 2.7 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 20% owned, projected at 17.5 fantasy points here in week 12. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary, $1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Seahawks favored by 3.5. Kenneth Walker has scored 13, 31, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 10, 26, and 18 rush attempts, on top of 8, 4, and 2 pass targets. So I like Kenneth Walker here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Now I also like James Conner from the Arizona Cardinals playing the LA Chargers, who have the 7th worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. James Conner has averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 12 rush attempts per game and 4 pass targets per game. Gonna be about 17% owned, projected at 15.4 fantasy points here in week 12. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary, only $400 more on FanDuel, so I love that FanDuel price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals trailing by 3. So James Conner has scored 13, 24, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 14, 21, and 7 rush attempts, on top of 5, 3, and 5 pass targets. Great matchup here. It looks like he's going to get around 20 touches here this week, and it's going to be a high-scoring game. So I like James Conner here versus the LA Chargers. Okay, another running back that I like, under 6K on DraftKings. I like Jeff Wilson Jr. from the Miami Dolphins playing the Houston Texans, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Jeff Wilson Jr. has averaged 12 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.8 rush attempts per game, 2.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 26% owned, projected at 14 fantasy points here in week 12. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary. Now he is $1,800 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, and they have the Dolphins favored by 14. So it could be a running game script for the Dolphins. Man, Jeff Wilson Jr. has scored 25, 16, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. But really, only the last 2 games matter here because he was running behind Raheem Mostert, but now he has taken the lead as the number 1 running back. And in the last 2 games, he scored 25, 16 fantasy points. He had 17 rush attempts and 5 pass targets last game. So I do expect him to get 20 plus touches in this game, which is a great matchup, and it could be a running game script. So I like Jeff Wilson Jr. here versus the Houston Texans.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So the stud on the slate that I like here, there's a little bit of risk here because Kyler Murray coming back from injury. So we want to see if he's, the Kyler Murray that we saw earlier in the season, or if he's going to be suffering from taking all those games off. But take a look at DeAndre Hopkins from the Arizona Cardinals playing the LA Chargers, who have the 7th worst defense overall. Now, they've been pretty good versus opposing wide receivers, but DeAndre Hopkins has averaged 22.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.6 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 100% of the snaps, going to be about 16% owned, projected at 17.9 fantasy points here in week 12. He's $7,700 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals trailing by 3. DeAndre Hopkins has scored 18, 20, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 12, 14, and 5 pass targets. Now, the reason that I like this pick, even though it's not the best matchup, and we have a little bit of risk with Kyler Murray just coming back off of injury, is because Rondale Moore is going to be out. They don't have a lot of wide receivers, so I think they're going to have to force feed DeAndre Hopkins. I can see him getting 12 to 15 pass targets in this game. So I like DeAndre Hopkins here versus the LA Chargers. Okay, now I think Mike Evans is in an interesting spot here at only $6,700 DraftKings salary. Tom Brady had the game of his season last game. Could be the start of a trend for Tom Brady, trending upwards, which would bode well for Mike Evans. I think Christian Kirk's in a good spot. DK Metcalf, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Lockett. But the wide receiver that I think is just priced way too low here, and especially because Mike Williams is going to be out, I like Keenan Allen from the LA Chargers playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have the 2nd worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Keenan Allen, he's only averaged 9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.7 pass targets per game. He's been hindered with a hamstring injury, and he was limited in the game last week. Still scored 13 fantasy points off of 8 pass targets, but he put in a full practice throughout the whole week.
Looks like he is finally over that hamstring injury, so he's going to be about 15% owned, projected at 15.3 fantasy points here in week 12. And he's only 6,100 DraftKings salary, 1,200 more on FanDuel. So I think that price tag is just a bit too low for his upside, considering he could easily get 10 to 15 targets in this game with Mike Williams out. So Keenan Allen, like I said, he scored 13 fantasy points last week off of 8 pass targets, and that was in a limited fashion. So I like Keenan Allen as a full go here with no Mike Williams versus the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, now I also like Terry McLaurin from the Washington Commanders playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the third worst defense overall. They give up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Terry McLaurin has averaged 13.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.3 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 91% of the snaps, going to be about 14% owned, projected at 15 fantasy points here in week 12. He's only 5,800 DraftKings salary. He's 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 40.5 points scored in this game, with the Commanders favored by 4. Now, Terry McLaurin, he's had a fantastic season. He scored 10, 24, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games, up of 7, 11, and 9 pass targets. So consistent production, consistent volume, fantastic matchup. Price tag is way too low here. So I like Terry McLaurin here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, moving on to the tight end position, I like Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews has averaged 15.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 79% of the snaps, going to be about 13% owned, projected at 15.5 fantasy points, 15.7 fantasy points here in week 12. He's 6,500 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Ravens favored by 3.5. Mark Andrews scored 12 fantasy points last game off of 8 pass targets. I think he's going to get 8 to 12 pass targets in this game. I think he's clearly the best pass catcher for the Baltimore Ravens. So I like Mark Andrews here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So another tight end that I like is George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They've been pretty good versus opposing tight ends. George Kittle has averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 89% of the snaps, only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 11.3 fantasy points here in week 12. He's 5,300 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43 points scored in this game, with the 49ers favored by 9.5. So George Kittle scored 24, 3, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 2, and 5 pass targets. I think he keeps this momentum rolling. What a big game he had last week, and I think he can score a touchdown here again this week. So I like George Kittle here versus the New Orleans Saints.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching.
Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.